Welcome to another episode of the Career Keynotes podcast with Tincup and Gardiner, where William and Andrew chop it up with respected Silicon Valley talent acquisition and HR leaders to get the real story behind their career journeys, along with an insider's view of how companies engage with candidates. Let's face it, these days, finding the job, much less nailing down an interview, is not easy. This is a rare opportunity to learn firsthand what companies are looking for in a candidate and the best ways to engage with them. And now, here are William and Andrew.
All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. So excited to see you, and I am very excited about today's guest. Before I introduce her, I just want to qualify. That is William. We're having some technical difficulties, so it's a screensaver of William, and you guys know what William looks like, and rest assured he's there and he's okay. So without further ado, I would like to introduce to you today's guest. I've had the pleasure of knowing AJ for, gosh, I guess I could say years, not long enough. I guess I could start there. I've always admired and respected her work, both within talent acquisition and human resources in general. She is a pioneer, a kindred spirit, and just a ball of energy, and does a lot of good in the world. So AJ, welcome to the show.
Bonjour, comment allez-vous? Je m'appelle Angèle. Je suis la jeune fille. Great to meet you. No, I'm just kidding. Hi.
No, just say we. Okay.
Awesome.
So AJ, as you know, I'm very fond of you, and I talk in effusivity, which I believe is a word. So rather than me tell the audience who you are and what you're all about, if you wouldn't mind taking a few moments and just introducing yourself and your narrative, and you don't have to build a piano, but just some context about who you are and what your background is, that would be lovely.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm definitely not going to build a piano, but I'll sure try to achieve one octave if we can. So slice of my life, who am I? AJ Thomas. I would say, for those out there that don't know, the statement that sums up who I am is, if you want to work on the future, you've got to work with the future. And so a lot of what I do really culminates, talent, culture, and career, yes, and also really making sure that where I'm focusing a lot of my time is really investing in whatever the next generation looks like, and being able to give them the same access and opportunities that otherwise was probably not part of something that I've had before as well, and really being able to encourage them to sometimes see a better version of themselves than they actually see. So again, you want to work on the future, you got to work with the future. And I believe that's where a lot of great ideas come from. And I get a lot of my energy from that too. You're muted, Andrew. There you go.
That's a rookie move. I was moving stuff around. I just didn't want to interrupt the flow of what you were saying, and I wrote it down. Okay, so that's a great start. So AJ, as we were talking before we started recording, I do talk effusively about you, but it's true. You have risen to the top of a very difficult, challenging industry or space, and talent acquisition, in my opinion, of the trifecta or triumvirate of comp and benefits, training and development, and talent acquisition, it's the hardest one, and to be good at it and to enjoy it, and to be passionate about it and spirited like you are is not insignificant. And I suspect, like most of our guests, you didn't say, you know what, a lot of us, when I grew up, I'm going to be a doctor, I'm going to be an astronaut, I'm going to be this. But I've never heard, I think one of our guests, you guys jump in if I'm wrong, one of our guests has a degree or some educational background in HR. But for the most part, people fall into it. So how did you get involved with HR, talent acquisition, and why?
Yeah, so I do fall in the category of either the doctor, astronaut, professional, etc. But I will say, when I was younger, I wanted to be a scientist or an astronaut. And I will say why a scientist was because my favorite food growing up was Mentos and ice cream. And at the time, when you read the ingredients of how Mentos and ice cream are created, my powers of deduction led me to believe that only a scientist can read these ingredients. So I pursued a lot of that, and I think also just the natural curiosity around it. And again, just the astronaut piece was just always very enamored with, what's in space, what does that look like? Just that lovely curiosity around all of the things that are yet to be known. So that was really fun. But I did not raise my hand, and say, hey, I'm going to be an HR professional, or I'm going to be doing this. I actually started out, believe it or not, in sales. So I started out in sales. I was very first job actually, making $3.25 an hour at Gordon's Jewelers, selling jewelry. And my first official kind of role after that was then I went from selling jewelry to selling phones and phone plans at T-Mobile to then falling into the recruiting space, where I was then starting to sell job opportunities. And that was kind of my first bite into the role. I actually didn't even know what a recruiter was when I started out. I come from a military background family, and I remember recruiters would call me and I would say, no, thank you. I'll serve my country in other ways.
Right.
So my siblings, they populate the Navy and the Air Force. So it's very interesting falling into this kind of industry and having my first bite at really the people piece of what we do professionally in the recruiting space. And I started actually recruiting HR professionals, believe it or not. So that's where I started falling in love with the job and going, oh, that's really interesting. Tell me more about what you do. I did direct placement recruiting at a place called Adecco, which, by the way, which was really funny because how I found that job was one of my clients at T-Mobile recruited me because they're like, I think you'd be a great recruiter.
Yeah.
And I turned him down 3 times. And I said, I'm sorry, like, I'm not going to join the armed forces. I'm families. He's like, no, that's not what I'm talking about. Just come meet me at the office. And we had a great chat about that. And I had my first kind of direct placement role focused on human resources here in the Silicon Valley. And then, the rest is kind of history from there. I could talk a little bit more about that later, but just thought it'd be interesting to let you guys know it's kind of evolved from different places of really recruiting. Never thought I'd get into that. So,
first of all, thank you. I'm $3.25 an hour. I mean, what did you start when you were 1? Because that's when I think that's what minimum wage was when I was, anyways. But and you are, and I think as most of us would agree, recruiting is sales. But that's and I remember Adecco when it was Adia before it was Adecco, and that doesn't surprise me because you are very good, and the passion obviously serves you well. Okay, so one of the things I think I admire most about you is your curiosity, your open-mindedness, your willingness to try new things and pursue uncharted waters. And to be, candidly, just very joyful about it. Like, you have such good energy. You're always positive. It's always, and under less than ideal circumstances, mind you. And so just going back to something, so the ascension and the pathway to TA makes a lot of sense to me. At any point in time, did you kind of doubt it, or did you fell in love with it? And then were there any kind of tipping points or inflection points where you were like, you know what, maybe this, any doubts or hesitations, or was it always just, you know what, I'm home?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. So my journey doesn't stop in the TA space. It was kind of where I had a taste of blood around kind of the people work, which was really interesting. And again, I've had the blessing of, after coming out of Adecco, actually being recruited by a client that I was working with for a more kind of HR operational role. So exploring the other wide world of HR that was out there, comp and benefits, L&OD, people and culture work was in the rise, and employee engagement, but it still wasn't kind of a big focus. I do remember a very kind of jarring moment that I had in TA when I was working as an executive recruiter, recruiting a client or recruiting for a client. And it's a little bit of a heart kind of, I had to have a conversation with myself on whether or not I wanted to continue in that specific type of line of work. It was very fulfilling getting folks their offers. It was also very interesting meeting folks because, I'm a very tiny person. And when they meet me, they're like, oh, you look like a new grad. And I have like 25 years in my career. Like, how can you actually help me get a job and all of those things? But the very interesting client that I had where I kind of had my come to Jesus moment around whether or not I want to continue in TA was actually a client I was working for where I had closed an offer with an HR director for a company. And I hadn't heard from my client for 2 weeks after that offer had been closed. So I didn't know what was going on, what was kind of happening. I was kind of liaising with the contacts that we had at the organization. I'm not going to say the organization, but it's just kind of like the moment that I went through there. And I actually found it was the first time I actually cried because I had found out my client had passed away. Yeah. My client had passed away and I was now in this kind of limbo point where my HR director was supposed to start and report into this client that I had. And so it was a very shocking moment to me where it was like, wow, this like TA is so much about relationships and so much about what you bring to the table to help people in a season of their lives and not just a rec that you fill for commission that you'll get for some dashboard where you'll have another open to fill ratio, etc. That's when it transformed for me that there was so much more to this type of work. And while that was a very big hit, because I remember telling my manager at the time, I had hung up the phone because the senior vice president who I was talking to, who had given me the news, had me talk to the candidate soon afterwards because we were going to try to figure out kind of what do we do, where do we place this person, etc. And I remember hanging up the phone and my recruiting manager at the time said, what's wrong? Did something happen with your family? I said, no, our client passed away. Like, I don't know how to like handle this. What do we do? And that is actually where it opened up the rest of the world around HR for me, because the rest of the process of going through that was interacting with, the HR managers and the different folks that had to come in and really make sure that we had a plan for the candidate that was coming in. So it was a very unique experience very earlier on in my career in TA. And that's actually what led me to say, I'd love to explore a little bit more. I'm curious now about this people work. It can't just be this recruiting space. There's all of these other areas that, I've talked about with other candidates and stuff. So yeah, I know. Very interesting story, but that was a poignant moment for me in my very short kind of time lived in recruiting. So I've always kind of been around recruiting because I realized the job is hard and I could make a better difference not being a recruiter, but being somebody that can be part of the support system that actually supports the TA ecosystem. So, yeah.
That's fantastic, AJ. I love the beginning when you talk about the future. Actually, I love your take on the future just in general. And I wish more people shared your enthusiasm and beliefs. But I wanted to slightly steer you towards mentoring and mentorship. So I wanted to get your take on, through your career, how you've been mentored, or if you've been mentored. So let's not assume that you have. And also going to get your take on, what HR should do in terms of this next generation and how we should facilitate mentoring.
Very, very good question.
Interesting question, William.
Yeah, mentorship. So I will say I would not be where I am if I hadn't stood on the shoulders of some really amazing folks in the industry that I had to learn from. And some I learned from the very hard way, and some that really gave me some really great advice on things that they say, hey, I've gone around that corner before and you're about to hit a wall. So I really value the mentors that are there that can really speak to who I am as a human being and not just say, oh, well, here's how you get promoted or here's what you need to do. They really ask you more about, well, what are you thinking about in your life? Where do you want to go? What is the direction you want to get at, right? Because I think there are different kinds of mentorship where, you're there for a season, which is great. You have a mentor for the specific role that you're in, right? Or you have a mentor for the specific situation that you're going through, and you kind of go to those folks, which is really great. But what I've found is a common thread to amazing mentorship are folks that have a natural curiosity for you as a human being.
Hmm.
And I've tried to replicate some of that in the work that I do as well. I mean, we started my nonprofit that my husband and I started back in 2010. Infuse Program Foundation. I mean, we ended up graduating over 600 kids in Eastside, San Jose, that were in the underprivileged and kind of overlooked population in Eastside. And we did that through a partnership of, some of the mentors I had met in my career that came in as adjunct faculty to actually teach these kids. And so there was almost a reverse mentorship that was going on too, because some of the folks that had been in their careers for 15, 20, 30 years who were teaching these kids who, quite frankly, didn't really know them from anything, right? Very accomplished people coming in, and these kids are like, I don't know who you are. Gave them a brand new perspective on things as well. And I think from that season of my life is where I learned that, if you really take an interest on, how the future or how people are thinking about, it doesn't even have to be the future, but if I'm talking to you, well, if I'm talking to Andrew, if I'm talking to Bev, you really take an interest on where they want to go in that current season of their life. I think anyone can be a mentor, and they don't necessarily have to be somebody, that has had a lot more experience, but maybe it's somebody that has had more perspective, right? So I kind of take a look at it in that area, and who are we as a human species other than people that give each other an exchange of perspectives, and that kind of drives us to decisions and inspiration and where we want to go and all of those things. So I have been mentored by some really amazing folks as well. But again, the very common thread of what I take away usually is, what is your interest in not only helping me in a specific situation, but to challenge me in thinking about, where do you want to go? Where does this lead you? And sometimes, the best mentors are also coaches, because they don't just tell you what to do. They actually get you to think about it. And then you suddenly you own that decision, and there's such a freedom in, you making that choice because you've had a lot of really great mentorship and input. So that's kind of my take on the common thread of mentorship, both being on the receiving end and on the giving end, is that there has to be that connection around a further interest than just a transactional, well, do you want to get promoted, or you want to do this, or you want to get over this situation, etc.
I love it. Thank you.
AJ, you are so selfless and such a giver of self. And the audience is just, I've watched AJ do so many things, and with no expectation of reward or reciprocity, and oh, by the way, be incredibly successful in a very short order. Many people that I know have labored long and hard for years and years, never to get to where you are. And it's not a race. You're exactly the kind of person, AJ, that should be where you are doing what you're doing, because I've told you this before, you can affect real change. You walk the talk, people will engage with you, and they will follow you because you're doing the work. You're not just talking about it. You're not a good self-promoter, which is a good thing to be bad at, by the way. So I don't mind promoting you right now, audience. If you're, AJ's career trajectory has been, no pun intended, a moonshot, to the top, and rightly so, because you are curious, you are willing to go the extra mile, you do want to make an impact and a difference, and you have. All right, so all that being said, I imagine, I don't like making assumptions, but I imagine you hit some hurdles and some roadblocks along the way. In fact, I know you did, and some of them I'd rather have you tell us what they are than me surmise. But it's the job, HR and talent acquisition is not an easy job to be successful. I don't care how qualified you are or how passionate, or it's just not easy, especially when you have the level of care and commitment to over delivering that you seem to enjoy. So what are some of the less obvious challenges that you have encountered with your vocation, and then maybe some not so obvious ones?
Yeah. So One, I will say, working and doing this type of work, there's two things that I've come to observe over the years. Specifically, one, HR, the people space, people and culture, whatever we call it, right? Talent space. It's always going to be a job where everybody knows how to do your job better than you do.
Nice.
Well, because
Timestamp. Everybody lean in. Get that. AJ, now we're looking for segments of the show where we go, okay, she just said something really good that we want to carve it up. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think the other side of it that I've learned, especially just in the past decade of, going through different work. I mean, I've been in TA, I've been in sales, I've been in marketing, I've been in support engineering, I spent a few years in product. I've been kind of a collector of these professional herbs and potions, if you kind of have a visual, to kind of end up where I am. I never had like this career trajectory, as we talked about earlier, of I want to be this by this date. I've kind of just led with my natural curiosity and ended up, in some fantastic places I've had the opportunity to be of service to. So the other piece of the coin around the observation I've made in being a part of this industry, which is probably a little less obvious because when you're working with people, it's just so hard. It's not something you debug. It's not something that has a root cause corrective action. There's a lot of emotion and history and things that you unfold and things that you can not begin to understand. And I think part of it that I've seen is something I hold on close to is you cannot hold people accountable for the sacrifices you choose to make that they cannot see. And in HR, especially in the people work, you make a lot of sacrifices for the good of an organization, the good of its culture, the good of its people. Will everyone like it? Absolutely not. But when you are driving change, when you are at the epicenter of moving an organization from a completely manual ecosystem to a digital transformation, as an example, or when you're going through an M&A, or when you're going through a joint venture, or when you have to do a company split, right? I mean, these are all things I've experienced in my just past decade of working specifically in the people in HR space. It's really interesting to see that it can get the best of you sometimes, right? And sometimes you sit there and you're like, gosh, I feel like I made the right decision, yet I've got kind of a litany or a mutiny happening here because no one liked the minor benefits change we made, or no one liked that we made a decision on the 401k fiduciary, on a strategy of how to reinvest this, that, and the other, or no one liked the output of the employee relations case that we had, or no one liked the training because the room was too cold, or no one liked the executive coach because they were too out there, or you get everything, or no one liked the candidate experience, or the offer was too low and the offer was too high, or the ice is too cold and the water's too wet. And what I think people don't realize in this industry and in this line of work is that there are a lot of sacrifices that are made that are actually buffered in front of the employees so that employees can actually focus on what they need to do to work. And what I've seen actually in the industry that's been really interesting too is a little bit of a, I'm going to use this really funny word, but it's a bird, the NBC logo, they use the peacock, right? There's a lot of people and culture work that it's kind of, I'm seeing like this peacock like come through, like we are people and culture and this is what we do. And I appreciate that. But there's something also about the expertise of the role that we hold that is not just about the fun stuff we get to do in this space, right? Yeah, we're not a surgeon. We're not operating on people where they're going to die on the table, and if you cut an artery the wrong way, but you could affect the way that somebody's future is determined by some minor choices that you make, right? Think about layoffs, right? Think about taking a risk on that diverse candidate that you probably would not have taken a risk on. That's a life-changing moment for them. And I think that's like less obvious for people to realize. And that's why I think for anyone going into this line of work, you have to realize there's a human behind everything, and that it's not going to be rainbows and unicorns and fun stuff and engagement events and all that stuff all the time. That it does require you to have a heart and a soul and a mind for people, and a vested interest in ensuring that you're not only doing the right thing, but you're also doing it the right way. So that, as I would say, would be, my
I love it.
reflection.
You've also, what's beautiful about your response is you've explained both the elegant parts of HR, but also the soul sucking plumbing parts of HR that we don't talk too much about, but we should. I don't want to be assumptive and say that there's something that holds HR back. I'd rather you tackle that. Do you believe that there's something that holds HR back? And if so, what do you think that is?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can only speak from experience of what I think I have seen has held me back personally as well. I mean, I've ascended in my career, I think, a lot faster, which I don't take for granted at all. I've been able to be of service as a head of HR and CHRO role, and before, which I will say it's a really, really hard job. Looks great on the resume, might be a little bit, soul sucking for sure. They should put that on the job description, by the way.
They should.
Soul sucking.
Yeah,
soul sucking, 50% soul sucking. There
yeah,
you go.
that's right. That's definitely a skill set of the competency. I would say I think what might hold people, I always call it people practitioners or HR folks back, is, the assumption that what we see is what it is, right? I mean, think about a little over a year ago when you had a lot of these companies that are like, remote work, no, everybody needs to be in the office, right? And this surfing of the chaos we've done in the last year has really challenged a lot of HR practitioners and people practitioners, because I think we did a very gravity defying shift in our mindsets that, the current times actually forced us to make, right? And I think for the organizations that were already, people practitioners that were already ahead of that, saying like, hey, technology is going, let's try this, let's figure out what we need to do, it didn't affect them as much, right? I mean, I look on LinkedIn and there are COVID playbooks up the wazoo all day,
Oh, yeah.
links, resources. It's so overwhelming. And I think at the end of the day, I think what holds us back is us seeing things for what it is, either because we're like really excited about it in the moment or whatever it may be, or we're hooking onto a trend, and not really saying, that's great, I'm really curious, what happens after this, right? And even just the simple act of being curious and having the courage to explore that is something that I think is small, not something you can get through a SHRM certificate or a PHR or a conference or a community thing or whatever. It's really that insatiable curiosity of saying, oh, okay, we have resumes today. What happens when we don't? What happens when we have to hire in Mars? Like little things like that I think as people practitioners, we shouldn't take for granted that wonder. Because so my daughter had this quote that she sent me, which I love, by the way. And I don't know where it came from, but she was like, this is really cool, Mom. Like, she just texted it to me, right? She's 9. Yes, she texted. We have deal on the phone, like when she can use it, when she can't. But the quote that she had in there was, certainty kills wonder, right?
Wow.
When you're so certain about something that you're no longer able to wonder what the other possibilities are, you start to really stagnate, and then you're no longer adding actual fulfilled value of what you're meant to add. So I think as people practitioners, what holds us back is certainty.
That's awesome.
Oh, great answer, AJ. If you're gonna get about 1,000 million job offers after this thing airs, just so you know, and rightly so. Okay, I want to go back. Actually, you know what, Producer Bev, I'm curious if you have a question for AJ, because I'm guessing you do.
I don't have a question just now. One thing I really liked that you talked about, though, was exchange of perspectives, because that's not just an HR-based, TA-based anything. That's just life, and I think it's enormously helpful for everybody. And that's really all I got so far.
Yeah. No, That's a good observation and certainly worth restating. So AJ, you, to William's point, you did an amazing job of, because TA is not glamorous. We've all been in that situation where, hey, my brother's friend's cousin's kid's graduating from college. Could you talk to him about? So you get that. And then you get the non-glamorous soul sucking. It's true. We don't need to have a TA not pity party, but we all know where most of the dead bodies are buried. We all know that you got to break a few eggs if you want to make an omelet. But you did a really good job of describing not the glamour, but the allure of TA, along with oh, by the way, it is not all puppies and pastries. It's a lot and I know that, and I've done a really good job of sticking with the winners, people like you that walk the talk, that do the work, and remain spirited and passionate despite of having to endure. I mean, having your client pass away, are you kidding me? That would cripple an ordinary person. And anyways, and so you've retained your joie de vivre and your love of life. Okay, so we have to pivot soon, but I have just a couple more questions on the TA side. I happen to know of a lot of the good and the impact that you've done. The audience doesn't. So I'd love to hear what are one or two of the things that you've done that you're most proud of, and then maybe I don't think you have to do the hardest thing, because maybe the death of the client might have been the hardest, but either of those. But ideally, what have you done that you are most proud of? And there's a lot to choose from, and we both know that.
Yeah, it's specifically it at work, professionally. Is that what you're saying, Andrew? Just kind of.
Yeah, well, but you know what? When you're one of these people, it all rolls into one. I mean, you're a blur, so
Yeah.
it doesn't. And that's a compliment, by the way. You're pretty. Your thermometer is always at what can I do to help, whether it's the school stuff, your parenting stuff, work stuff. I personally reached out to you a number. You know me, I'm always there when I need you. So, but you pick up professionally would be good, but I think it all bleeds together.
Yeah, I would say, the thing I'm most proud of is, so this is another one that'll throw you. I answered an ad for a newspaper ad that was asking for mentorship in Eastside San Jose, particularly at Andrew Hill High School. That was how I didn't start off saying, I'm going to start a nonprofit. It just kind of ended up as this thing. And answering this ad, and I remember her name is Mary Metz. I don't know if she has retired yet from the school district, but I remember the interview with her where she asked me, okay, so why do you want to mentor? Like, I don't understand what I said. I just feel like there's a need for me to be able to kind of give back. I've had such a great opportunity to, experience what I have in the workplace, that there might be some things that I can offer here. And by the way, some of these kids remind me of me growing up. I'm a first generation immigrant, another story for a later time, but found out I was undocumented after I'd already received a full ride scholarship, and didn't kind of know what to do from that standpoint. But it was really interesting. That work led me to over a decade of, getting the network within the Silicon Valley, marrying the west side of the 101 to the east side, discrepancy of the 101, and working with some really amazing students that I actually talk to this day, and still give advice to, and still connect to recruiters. And, we kind of go back and forth. Again, this is the whole working with the future thing. So if there's anything I'm actually most proud of, is the fact that experience for me was not just something I went on by myself. My husband and I both co-founded that nonprofit organization. We worked on that together. We had the first business competition pitch with a live band, which was really interesting because my husband was like, I'm looking for a way to get involved. And I'm like, why don't we have a live band at pitch night? And here we were performing at Google and LinkedIn and, Adobe and all these places. And so I think for me, that has been the biggest kind of moment of pride in knowing that you don't accomplish things by yourself, but that if you continue to lean in, the output is, if I would have changed one student's life, awesome. But the fact that we raised graduation rates, because we focused specifically in the juniors in the high schools, they had the highest dropout rates, right? So the model for Infuse worked like this. We'd give them 9 weeks of entrepreneurial-based training taught by adjunct faculty from Google, Facebook, Microsoft, like some of the big kind of technology organizations in the last decade, coming in and teaching about product management and finance and presentation. And I even had some startup entrepreneurs coming in there, giving them that exposure, again, an exchange of perspectives, right? And then being able to see, that junior year where it was very pivotal for them, where they're like, forget it, like I'm out, right? When they'd go through this program, we had 100% success rate of them going into their senior year, and they would get the scholarship because, when you're at a VC, you're pitching for money. They would pitch their ideas in return for scholarship money for them to continue on to college. We had the highest rates of folks actually not only graduating from high school, but also enrolling in vocational 2-year and 4-year universities. And these were kids that had 2.0 or below GPAs. I'm so proud of that work because also my daughter, when she was 4, full circle now, we had an event at Google where she welcomed over 500 people in the community to the Infuse program Symposium of Ideas. And she's kind of been just very involved in a lot of the things that we do. We now have an organization called Brain Candy Labs that we're working on with Women in Tech International, which has been really fun. But the proudest moments in my life is really realizing that I have a team of really amazing, supportive people that also believe in working with the future. And I've had the chance to touch lives in a way that wasn't kind of predetermined, but just kind of I followed that curiosity and that passion. And it's something that I'm going to continue to do. So the story is, the rest is still unwritten, as Natasha Bedingfield would say.
Good. And let's hope it's there's a lot more left to be done. And just for what it's worth, there's so many things you could have said about what you're proud of. You've definitely made an impact on so many people's lives, including mine. My proudest moment of you, just as a little bit of a non sequitur, was at the Mini Witty conference when they kind of said, hey, you know what? How about you and your business partner MC the event? Here's the microphone. And you're like, perfect. It's like, lights, camera, action. And you just rose to the occasion and did it and didn't make, well, okay, sure. I'll do it, I guess. And it was like, wow, that was pretty, well, I mean, I know it was kind of a left-handed compliment. It would have been nice had they given you a little bit for a warning. But anyways, oh, there she is, one of them. So anyways, and I think just to put a bow on it, you have been amply and correctly rewarded for all the time and effort and passion and giving that you've done. It's just, again, an honor to have you on the show. Okay, I got the note from producer Bev that it's time to pivot. So,
hey Andrew, before we do, I have a question before we go there. So 100 years ago, I managed 2 or 3 offices that were in Canada. And I learned that maternity leave, FMLA, as they know it in Canada, is a year.
Oh, that's so awesome.
So I want to get your take on that as an HR pro.
Great question.
What do you? I mean, there's pros and cons to everything. So okay, so I can tell you some of those from my experience in managing those offices. But I just wanted to get your take before we move to the TA stuff. What do you think about it? If we were to actually, as a country, take that on and make maternity leave or paternity leave a year?
Yeah, I would say rock on, would you bet? Because breaking news, I guess we'll talk about here on the podcast. I'm actually expecting our 3rd child this summer. Thanks. And I will say, when I had, so my daughter is 10. I have a son that is 5 years old, and then we have another one coming this year, which would basically put the children's span at about 15 years. And I had a harrowing moment with my husband about 2 weeks ago where I said, do you realize we in high school for the better part of a decade and a half.
Yeah, I was just
And he
gonna
was
say.
like, oh, wow. Yeah, that's very spaced out. But I would say, I think it would be wonderful for mothers. I mean, I had, when I had my daughter 10 years ago, it's very different from the climate now, and especially the organization I work for now, who is just so generous in all places. But I think that should be equitable across the board for all mothers.
Right.
Because I mean, as a mother, I actually, I will say, I had postpartum with my first one, and I came back to work after 4 weeks. After 4 weeks.
4 weeks.
One, because I'm a little bit more encouraged to talk a little bit about the postpartum now than I was prior.
Sure.
One, I wanted to go.
Thank you, by the way, because it's not talked about enough, AJ.
Well, I wanted to go back to work as soon as I did because I could not stand being there, right?
Right.
And then the other piece was I was also very, very early on in my career where I wasn't making enough money for me to really be gone for the whole entire time.
Right.
It's really stressful where you're trying to bond with your child and you're going through these physical and emotional changes in your body and you're worrying about this. And luckily, again, I had some really amazing bosses and managers who actually, before I went out on leave, promoted me and gave a signal and said, we value mothers in this organization and you are going to come back to a new and expansive role that we know that you can do. And they really, I've been very blessed in that sense. And that also happened with my second child as well. I was promoted shortly after I gave birth to him as well. And that was in Galley's organization, or Chris Galley's organization at 10X. But I've been a recipient of the, choice you have to make as a mother on whether or not you
Right.
go back to work or not go back to work. So if there was a 1-year maternity leave and we had that here, let's take that to the White House. That's a worthy cause. So that's what I think.
Awesome. Well,
Thanks for asking.
thank you.
That is a good for you, William. Way to sneak that in there. And do you know what? You make it a really good point, AJ. I see couples with maybe young children or newborns, and I think to myself, oh my goodness, you have I mean, I know it looks cool with the stroller and then COVID notwithstanding, but and you, bless your soul, you're going to be able to come in and really help a new mothers group or whatever. You're not going to, I don't know what you're going to do, but I'm sure you're going to you're going to give these people some insight and snapshots at different times. The 5-year thing is interesting because it's usually, I have 2 kids and it's, I think, 14 months. And I very much appreciate your candor around postpartum. It's tough. You're right. It's like, hey man, we need the dough. I got to get back out there, but then you got to hire someone who's going to look after the kid. And then pretty soon the tail's wagging the dog. So we could do a whole podcast on that, but listen, time is short, to producer Bev's point. So now we're going to pivot and we're going to talk about, okay, so AJ, you've hired a lot of people and you know a lot about how companies engage with candidates and ostensibly how candidates engage with companies. And one of the things that, producer Bev and William and I have talked about in the past is the way I look at it is if I'm helping companies hire the right people, then stands to reason that I'm helping people find the right jobs. And that's a passion of mine, is connecting people. I think I'm good at that. I know you're good at it. So just overarching, it's a big, broad, meaty subject, but what are some things, what's some feedback for you that you have? And, I know you well enough to know that you can roll up your sleeves and over deliver. But what we try to do, one of the goals of the show is to let people know, hey, companies don't have it all figured out. They're just as invested and keen on hiring you as you are on working for them. And it's not easy. It's never easy. So what kind of feedback or guidance or actionable, practical input do you have for people that are either new to the job market or struggling with getting traction in their job search? And, we get a lot of, hey, networking, and I want to, answer my own question, but I love your perspective and I love your energy. And I think one of the biggest shortcomings that people encounter is they're not good at advocating for themselves. And that's a given, especially in a very competitive a climate or, where there's more people than there are jobs. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I absolutely resonate with your point around, companies don't have it all figured out. I mean, if candidates could have a backstage pass to an interview process, would be it would be awesome because they can actually see that there is humanity in that process as well. And if employers had a backstage pass to what each candidate was going through, again, that exchange of perspectives is happening in that interview, right? I always like to say that I think if you are don't underestimate the power. If you're just coming in new, et cetera. I get a lot of this question from folks, particularly that are graduating from college. I'm actually coaching somebody right now who's just graduated from Stanford, kind of trying to figure out what do they want to do, and they've done all these projects, but it doesn't quite line up in the resume that they could submit. And I would say don't underestimate the power of your experiences. They ask you for experience for a reason. And by the way, experience doesn't mean how many years of experience have you had. I don't care about the quantity of experience. I care about the quality of experience that you've had. Tell me a story. Tell me a narrative about how you created that impact in that project you had for 6 months. Because that impact and outcome could be worth more than the 15, 20 years that someone has had in their job where they were just being safe, right? And not really trying anything new or creating impact because and again, everybody has a reason to do what they want to do. So I'm not knocking on anyone around their style, but I would say specifically for those folks that are starting out, don't get deterred by the resume, right? We have these checks for a reason. And I believe the reason is so that you can essentially move them aside and say, hey, actually here, I want to tell you about what my story is and how I can create impact in your organization. And really, by the way, understanding what that organization is. And I think in the TA world, what is it like, we do the spray and pray, right? Like, oh, just everyone. And then hopefully everyone comes in. Candidates do it too, right? Where they apply to everything. Gosh, I've had these interviews where we'll do a phone screen and the candidate says, what company is this for again? Like, let me look at my screen. Like, whoa, first of all, you don't know. Like, we shouldn't be on this call, right? So I think there's a value of knowing your story. And that goes for any, whether it's a job story or life story, whatever. But knowing your story, being able to have the courage to own that story, and then being able to communicate and really tell that story. So know it, own it, tell it, and hook it to the impact of whatever that organization is. And by the way, that same advice goes for employers as well. Just because you have a banner, awesome company that everybody loves and is the employer of choice, if you have that ding dong manager that goes in and completely butchers your entire candidate experience, that hurts too. Right. So I think it's very important that people realize both on the candidate end and on the hiring end and the employer end, it is an exchange of perspectives to get you towards how can you create impact and outcome for the organization or the season of life that candidate is in to want to contribute their value. So those are my thoughts on that. I have more thoughts on that, but I think just let's noodle on that for a little bit because I think that's
I love that. I love that. Now I'm going to ask AJ, I'm going to ask you a personal question, but you can anonymize it. So it's one of two things. It's either where you've had a horrible interview, but you got the job offer, and that was shocking, or it was an awesome interview in your mind, and you didn't get the job offer, which was shocking.
Good question.
So tell us about that.
All right. So what was one that sticks out for me? So one job that I was going for, and I'll anonymize the company and the thing, but I'll talk about the experience. So I was actually 6 weeks pregnant with my first. And I have this thing where it's like, I start a new job whenever I'm pregnant. It's really hilarious.
Right.
So
Fuck that.
I've been in my new job for a little bit over a year now, so I guess I kind of bucked the trend with this one. But one bad interview that I went through was really interesting because it was actually back when you didn't quite, LinkedIn wasn't really a big thing yet. There weren't really a lot of pictures up there on who you were yet. And people were kind of expecting, my name is AJ Thomas. It sounds like a 6'4" linebacker's name or whatever.
Right.
I don't even know how tall I am.
AJ Hawk, Green Bay Packers.
Exactly. So I think, and I've had this happen to me as a hiring manager before, where the candidate actually thought I was a dude as well. But there was a lot of bias in there. So, submitted my resume. It was really awesome. I mean, I still get notes on LinkedIn where people are like, "Hello, Thomas, I'd like to talk to you." But I'm like, okay, that is so dumb. Last name. Come on, recruiters, you can do better. But this particular interview was really interesting because I think the hiring manager was very shocked when they first met me. And the thing people always say is like, AJ, you're like got so much energy. It's really awesome. And it was the most horrible interview I'd ever gone through. I felt like they were shining the light and about to get the lie detector thing out. Like, is your name really AJ Thomas? Have you really done all of these things? Right. And the last question, which threw me, which was really interesting in that conversation, was the interviewer, basically, one of the interviewers had asked me, well, how much money are the current people you're managing making? Because it was for a manager role, right? And I thought that was a really odd question. But like looking back afterwards, I was like, what the hell? Why would you ask that question? Why does it matter? Number one, our industries are very different, right? But I didn't, it was kind of in hindsight at the time. It was the most awful interview ever. And I actually wrote the hiring manager back, right? Because they had said, I just don't think you have the experience for this role. You've got some really good stuff that you've worked on here, but it's just not. And when I wrote them back, because I was pregnant at the time too, I was like, oh hell no, like I get the hormones. Like, how will I ever?
Hell no.
Yeah. How will candidates ever get the experience if organizations are not open enough to take a risk? I got an offer a week later.
Nice.
Which I accepted. And
Aww.
actually the interviewer at the time, and again, I'm going to anonymize it, we became really great friends. And again, just had the opportunity to kind of learn from each other in that moment, because it was also at a time where I was really, not as affected, and you're almost kind of blind to it because you don't really know what's happening to you, where you're like, you're young, you're a woman of color, you got all these intersectionalities going on, right, that you don't realize, and it kind of becomes compound interest over time. But it was a really interesting conversation for me, because I think it also, for me, was like, I leaned into curiosity again and said, I want to ask a question. You said something in your interview that particularly was interesting, that I don't have the experience, but I've got all the qualifications. How will a candidate, not even me, ever get the experience if companies are not willing to take the risk? So that was a little intense at that time, but
love it. How'd they answer?
AJ.
They gave me an offer later. I didn't even get an answer from the email. I had a one-on-one with the person my first week onboarding, and we talked and laughed about it, actually.
Genius.
Like that's what sold it for them. And you know what's really funny? Sorry, just one more
Tell
thing.
me, please.
So that role, I was in charge of kind of all the HR operations and pieces. And you know how in the ATS you have the candidate notes, right? And so the candidate notes is so funny. I actually took a screenshot of this like years ago.
Nice.
The candidate notes was so funny. It said like, hire her. She's amazing. She's a fireball, but keep her very far away from me.
Oh, wow. You know what? That little anecdotal story, I mean, you said like 12 really profound things. The first thing is like, do you have 1 year of experience 10 times over, or do you have 10 years of experience? That little parable is so, and then the business about owning your story, having your story, owning your story, and then being authentic about it. Like, hey, I can come in and not, I think one of the biggest things I've noticed, just in the nothing compared to the coaching and the stuff that you do, AJ, is that people kind of, oh gosh, I don't want to mess it up, right? So they come in not, in tennis, it's like you're playing not to lose, versus playing to win. An interview, you want to play to win. Like you have nothing to lose, but people come in and they don't. And you clearly come in and you're very authentic and you are a fireball, and you're gonna show up as AJ Thomas. And oh, by the way, first impressions aren't always the you can't always. I've often found, when I'm time, it's not an interview about me, but oftentimes when I lock horns with someone or rub someone the wrong way because I was authentic or whatever it was about, whatever it was, I often find downstream, what, we actually really, you're cool and it's cool, and we actually play for and the bond is even stronger and more authentic. And I love that you took the time, and the follow-up is another part of it. Like, what, you're not going to win them all, but show up and be who you are and trust the process. And if it's, it's not a failure if you learn something. And I just give you a lot of credit because you basically gave 7 answers in one question, and all of it was really good. And I know we're coming up, we're over time, but you're a font of information as producer.
So I'd love to add just a little nugget in there.
Please.
When we think about, don't be afraid to fail. People say that all the time, but people don't actually know that FAIL stands for first attempt in learning.
Ooh, timestamp.
You have an opportunity to, it's only a mistake if you do it again, right? I think failure is
You got all kinds of good stuff. Ooh, it looked like producer Bev was about to ask a question, but then had to mute because her dogs the mailman must have showed up. That's such good advice, and you live it and you own it. And I, like, everything I know, I learned. And by the way, where good judgment comes from? It comes from experience. And you know where that comes from? Bad judgment. And so fail big, and that's why you're so successful. And listen, it's easy. We're on a podcast. There's nothing at stake, but to go in and own your stuff and be loud and proud and put your best foot forward, be prepared, to your point, be prepared, and not get tied to some certain expectation. You'll be shocked at the results, but showing up and not being afraid to fail is key. Okay, so we kind of have a little gimmicky thing at the end, but one more quick. And producer Bev, did you want to ask a question? Because I saw you on.
No, I was covering the dog.
Oh, okay. AJ, let's say you could, and you've said a lot of really good stuff. Audience, you see why we wanted AJ on the show. So, but let's say, that you could only impart 1, maybe 2 at the most, words of wisdom or cautionary or guidance or directives to leave the audience with, the candidates. What words of, not so much encouragement, but wisdom or feedback would you say the most important thing, other than the stuff you've already said?
I would say, and I'm taking a page out of Dr. Angeles Arian's book here, one of her 6 principles, which I love dearly. But I've kind of been using this as a battle hymn to my life recently, is be open to outcome, not attached to outcome.
Ooh,
I think
that's timestamp.
Being open to things allows you the opportunity to widen the aperture in your perspective, and you might just get a much more beautiful picture.
Could you say it again, the whole thing? What'd you say?
Be open to outcome, not attached to outcome. I think that goes for life, for work, for anything that you're doing. Because I think, again, that whole point of certainty kills wonder, it is so true, right? And I think as human beings, we are naturally disposed to wonder and to dream and to have joy. And I think that just is beaten out of us because we choose to believe maybe stories we tell ourselves that might not be true because we're attached to something. And I think the very moment of being vulnerable and authentic and letting go and not being attached to whatever that outcome is actually opens you up to learning. It opens you up to new perspectives. It opens you up to, things that might otherwise have been closed for you if you would have just stayed in this one thing. So even candidates are like, I really wanted that job, and if I don't get this job, then I'm never going to do it again or whatever. You've kind of like cut off your entire stream of opportunity without even leaning in and being curious, because there might be something better, right? It's like that diamond miner that's like, oh, I've been digging for 6 years. and they're 2 millimeters away from the biggest gem of their life and they quit, right?
Go, William. You're going to say something?
I was, but I was going to wait until she was. Did you want to finish, AJ?
Oh, I'm good. Just don't quit at the 2 millimeter mark. Just kidding.
Just don't quit. Period. End of story. I love that bit, by the way, and I wrote down that axiom. That's just wonderful. The last thing I have is I'm just curious as to kind of your favorite interview question or your favorite interview bit, like when you're across the table from somebody. What's something that you just love to do?
Oh, what's something that I
Question.
to do? Oh my gosh, yeah, this takes me back many places. So, it's always really interesting to me. It sounds really gimmicky, y'all, but I think it's a really interesting one. You know how everyone's got to kind of to do when we were doing in-person interviews. Of course, you can't do it virtually now, but it's always really interesting to me. So what I usually do if I'm interviewing somebody is I'll crumple a piece of paper and I'll put it in a really obvious place in the interview room. And when I bring somebody in, you know, there's candidates that are like, they look at it. Should I pick it up? Should I not pick it up? You know, and it's kind of like the existential question of their life. It's like, it's a piece of paper. The trash can's right there. Go ahead and do it. It's not a test, but it's just.
The answer is written on the paper. It's there in front of you.
Exactly. And it's just so interesting because you kind of observe a little bit, you know, and it's not like a judgment tool or anything like that. It's just a little bit more like you kind of see their thinking process. I had actually one candidate who like picked up the paper, went to go put it in the trash can, but then hesitated and then went back and put it back where it was and then sat back down. And, you know, it's just like, it's really interesting. Like, you get kind of like these interesting things. But again, that was back when we were doing in-person interviews, but I always love that. But I will say 90% of the time, folks would pick up the paper and put it in the trash.
Yeah. Yeah.
Simple thing.
Would they ask you if it was trash? Would they ask you, hey, is this trash?
No. I mean, it was just really interesting to, you know, and there was one I remember where it got really awkward because they were looking at the paper and then looking at me and then like trying to answer a question. I was like, would you like some water? Went out, got them some water, and then like I looked back down and the paper was no longer there, it was in the trash.
Yeah, it was gone.
I was like, okay, well, you could have picked it up right there. It's totally fine too.
This is an OCD test, is what it is. This is what it is. It's like making the paintings on the wall crooked on purpose, just to see if people just can't stop staring at it.
Yeah,
but
you
I love it.
said detail orientation in your resume. No, I'm kidding.
That's right. Fair enough.
Anyway.
Okay, you guys, listen. So AJ, thanks to you, we don't have to do the weird, awkward HR story because you worked like 6 of them in the interview. So you dodged a bullet and we're over. And I just want to thank you so much for showing
100%.
up and
100%.
being so authentic and so insightful. And this is going to be a very popular episode. So AJ, and congratulations, by the way, on I'm going to say little Andrew, but that's kind of presumptuous of me. But how can people get in touch with you, or is there anything you want to plug or promote? We've only got 1.2 million subscribers right now, so it's not going to be a huge deluge. But how can people get in touch with you or connect with you after hearing all this sagacity and wisdom?
So best way to get a hold of me is on LinkedIn, right? LinkedIn.com/in/it's AJ Thomas. Or you can catch me on Twitter. It's AJ Thomas as well, and happy to connect there. And if you just feel like reaching out as well, I mean, I'm happy to also have I'm naturally curious, so I'll entertain all kinds of really fun conversations, but specifically if it has something to do around education or kids in the future, etc. I would also encourage you guys to visit www.braincandylabs.com and send us a note at explore@braincandylabs.com because we are looking for really amazing people who want to share their stories about their interests in science and tech and engineering, arts and math for young kids in the next generation to really geek out on. So That's what I would say.
Nice. Braincandy.com. Definitely check it out, audience.
No,
You will be
braincandylabs.com.
braincandylabs.com, but it opens up into all those little areas that AJ just commented on, and there's a ton of good stuff there, and you're a ton of good stuff. And just thanks a lot for being on the show. Can't thank you enough. We'll have to do it again, and I'm super grateful.
Namaste. Au revoir.
Okay, everybody. See you next week. Like and subscribe. Back with more good TA stuff.
Thanks for watching this episode of Career Keynotes. For more killer content, please like and subscribe to our channel. We welcome all comments and questions and are grateful for any input regarding future content, topics, and guests. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.